As dawn broke on June 15, 1944, a German 105mm howitzer battery belonging to the 716th Static Infantry Division sat waiting near Caen, France, before unleashing an assault at 07:15 hours against British forces pushing inland from Sword Beach. Following strict tactical protocols that dictated discharging 3 to 5 salvos and immediately repositioning to evade Allied detection, the commanding officer initiated the strike. His artillerymen executed their duties flawlessly, launching a total of 12 projectiles that soared across a distance of 3,000 meters toward the advancing troops. Concluding the brief barrage, the officer commanded his men to halt and relocate, prompting the troops to execute a well-practiced routine of disengaging the trail spades, packing away munitions, and linking their weaponry to the prime movers.
Suddenly, a deafening noise, akin to massively amplified ripping fabric, tore through the air, heralding a devastating influx of American munitions raining down from various trajectories all at once. Rather than a traditional rolling barrage or a staggered artillery sequence, these explosives achieved a flawless, time-on-target execution, with every single projectile detonating within a narrow window of merely 3 seconds. The initial volley annihilated a pair of howitzers, while the subsequent blast claimed the lives of the commander and 7 of his subordinates, culminating in a third strike that obliterated their munitions cache and completely erased the battery's operational capacity. Astoundingly, the elapsed time from the final German discharge to the devastating impact of the American counterattack unfolded in under 5 minutes. This brutal reality echoed across the battlefields of Normandy throughout June and July of 1944, where seasoned German artillery units that had previously operated effectively in Poland, Russia, and earlier stages in France were now being systematically decimated. United States forces had engineered an incredibly swift counter-battery system capable of pinpointing adversary placements and unleashing concentrated mass fires far quicker than German military doctrine deemed feasible. The necessity for such a system was evident, as artillery had killed more soldiers than any other weapon since the American Civil War, making the practice of finding and destroying enemy cannons, known as counter-battery fire, a paramount objective for armies worldwide over numerous decades. Achieving this goal efficiently meant you had to overcome 3 distinct logistical hurdles that remained largely unresolved by global militaries until 1944, the foremost being the actual discovery of concealed enemy weaponry. Because these guns were meticulously hidden behind natural hills, within dense forests, or securely tucked into defilade positions away from direct observation, armies relied on technical methods developed during the First World War. Sound ranging utilized microphones to triangulate gun emplacements by capturing acoustic muzzle blasts, while flash spotting relied on surveyed observation posts to plot bearing lines directly toward visual muzzle flashes, supplemented by aerial reconnaissance from spotter planes. While these detection methodologies were functional, they operated sluggishly, typically requiring 15 to 30 minutes to isolate a battery, meaning an adversary, adhering to proper displacement procedures, would have completely vacated the area before retaliation could arrive. The second significant obstacle involved the extensive mathematical computations required to prepare your own armaments for a retaliatory strike. Artillerymen had to meticulously determine variables such as range, azimuth, elevation, and the exact propellant charge, all while compensating for environmental factors like wind currents, barrel wear, altitude, and shifting temperatures. Because every individual piece of artillery demanded its own separate set of calculations, even the most highly trained and proficient crews would exhaust between 5 and 8 minutes just to finalize the firing mission for a solitary battery using traditional procedures. The final challenge was synchronizing multiple batteries, as concentrating the firepower from dozens of guns onto a single target demanded meticulous planning. Historically, you required units to possess identical maps, exact topological survey data to verify each battery's position, and forward observers maintaining direct communication lines with every cannon group. Under the old paradigm, Each squad independently calculated their firing solutions and discharged their weapons when ready, dragging the entire sequence, from target acquisition to shells hitting the mark, out to a staggering 30 to 40 minutes. This lengthy delay perfectly played into the German strategy of shoot and scoot tactics, honed on the Eastern Front, which prioritized firing a few rounds and rapidly moving to an alternate position, ensuring that retaliatory strikes ultimately fell harmlessly upon empty fields. However, the Americans completely upended this dynamic by the summer of 1944, engineering a response mechanism capable of unleashing overwhelming mass counter-battery fire within a mere 6 to 9 minutes of identifying a target, and sometimes even faster. The interval between a German gun firing and the devastating arrival of American shells on that exact position became shorter than the time you needed to simply hook a howitzer to a prime mover. Interestingly, the innovation that made this astonishing speed possible was not born in active combat, but rather emerged 15 years prior within a classroom at an artillery school in Oklahoma. In 1930, instructors at the United States Army Field Artillery School situated at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, were grappling with a glaring doctrinal inefficiency regarding the standard First World War practice of concentrating fire from various batteries onto single targets. The core issue was that executing this essential tactic relied on dangerously slow and overly complicated methodologies. Traditional massing fire required extensive coordination, demanding that every separate detachment possess matching cartography, immaculate survey data of their own placements, and seamless communication with a forward observer, resulting in an uncoordinated volley that gave adversaries ample time to take cover. Recognizing the severe limitations of this disjointed approach, Major Carlos Brewer, a professional artillery officer and First World War veteran heading the gunnery department at Fort Sill, anticipated that future warfare would require profoundly faster and more flexible artillery support. Together with his instructors, Brewer pioneered a revolutionary concept they called the Fire Direction Center, which completely stripped individual batteries of their independent mathematical burdens by centralizing those calculations at the battalion level or higher. By assembling a dedicated team of specialists armed with detailed firing charts, pre-computed data, and direct communication to all subordinate batteries, this centralized hub could simultaneously process a fire mission and instantly transmit synchronized firing commands to all guns at once. During the spring of 1931, the gunnery department at Fort Sill showcased a novel technique for concentrating battalion-level artillery fire. By successfully synchronizing 24 artillery pieces across 3 separate batteries to strike a solitary objective, this demonstration proved highly effective. As you delve into this history, you will find that while the military eagerly embraced the Fire Direction Center as its official doctrine, translating these theoretical guidelines into actual battlefield operations presented a significantly more complex challenge. Successfully operating these fire direction centers demanded highly skilled personnel, specialized gear, and, crucially, a streamlined method of pre-calculated targeting metrics to bypass tedious arithmetic on the front lines. To solve this, American forces engineered innovative tools known as graphical firing tables. Officers stationed at Fort Sill designed bespoke chartboards containing predetermined ballistic trajectories that accounted for virtually any variable, including distance, gun elevation, powder temperature, atmospheric density, and prevailing wind patterns. Upon receiving a strike request, the personnel within the Fire Direction Center simply placed a scaled straightedge connecting the artillery's location to the intended target on their maps, seamlessly extracting the necessary coordinates straight from the board and relaying them to the crews. Because this ingenious system entirely bypassed the need for active mathematical problem-solving, the entire procedure was condensed into a mere 2 to 3 minutes. While competing nations also utilized ballistic reference guides, the American instruments proved vastly superior in both depth and speed.
whereas British, German, and Soviet systems respectively demanded mental arithmetic, complex logarithms, or the cumbersome cross-referencing of numerous documents. The visual American approach outpaced them all.
The next major breakthrough you must consider is the overhaul of military communications. As these centralized command hubs critically depended on unbroken links between frontline spotters and the artillery crews. Recognizing this necessity, the United States Army channeled substantial resources into developing radio technology tailored expressly for coordinating indirect fire. Consequently, by 1941, each American artillery battalion was equipped with overlapping communication networks that seamlessly bound the forward observers, the fire direction centers, and the heavy guns into a cohesive tactical unit. Education formed the third vital pillar of this transformation, given that managing a fire direction center necessitated experts capable of interpreting topography, manipulating graphical firing tables, and orchestrating numerous batteries amidst the chaos of combat. To meet this immense demand, the military established specialized academies devoted exclusively to instructing personnel in these advanced coordination techniques. Thus, by 1943, the Army ensured that all of its artillery officers, alongside a significant multitude of enlisted technicians, had undergone rigorous preparation in these centralized firing protocols. The fourth, and arguably most devastating advancement, one that struck profound fear into German gunners, was a tactical synchronization known as time on target. Although British forces initially pioneered this concept in the North African theater throughout late 1941 and early 1942, by leveraging BBC broadcast signals for timing, American engineers independently achieved a comparable capability via their centralized command framework. The fundamental objective of the time-on-target strategy was to coordinate the discharge of various dispersed batteries so that every single projectile impacted the objective at the exact same fraction of a second. To execute this flawlessly, the Fire Direction Center had to compute not only the specific distance and trajectory for each individual gun, but also the exact duration of flight required for those munitions to travel through the air. Following these complex assessments, the command hub would transmit a synchronized countdown, prompting each crew to unleash their payloads at the precise instant necessary to guarantee a unified detonation. As you can imagine, the resulting devastation was absolute. Rather than sustaining a prolonged bombardment that allowed troops to seek refuge, opposing forces were instantly engulfed as countless shells detonated within a mere 3-second time frame, transforming a quiet battlefield into a sudden, inescapable hurricane of steel without a shred of warning. American troops first unleashed the time-on-target technique during the brutal combat of the Guadalcanal campaign in 1943, operating under the command of General J. Lawton Collins. By the time Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, the military had polished this methodology into an orchestration of destruction entirely unrivaled by any global adversary. If you look at the historical records, an embattled infantry company could request heavy support and, within a staggering 9 minutes of that initial transmission, witness dozens of artillery pieces from across an entire corps sector executing a perfectly synchronized bombardment. A standard, heavily documented combat reality, rather than mere theoretical doctrine. However, the rapid concentration of artillery facilitated by the Fire Direction Center and the time-on-target technique only resolved the offensive half of the tactical equation for the Americans. These innovations still left the significantly more daunting challenge of actively hunting down concealed hostile gun emplacements prior to engagement. To accomplish this, the military had to rely on a suite of sophisticated target acquisition methodologies, initially forged during the First World War and polished over the ensuing 25 years, encompassing sound ranging, flash spotting, aerial observation, and ultimately, radar. Sound ranging operated by capturing the acoustic shockwaves generated by enemy fire, utilizing a network of microphones to pinpoint the exact origin point via geometric triangulation. a practice originally introduced by British forces during the First World War. By the Second Global Conflict, American acoustic units had adopted advanced electronic arrays capable of mapping hostile batteries within 3 to 5 minutes of an initial blast. Concurrently, flash spotting relied on multiple surveyed outposts observing the visual ignition of a weapon, allowing the central command to calculate intersecting bearings. While you would typically see this method deployed at night, it remained highly effective during daylight hours, provided there were unobstructed views. Aerial reconnaissance introduced small spotter aircraft, most notably the Piper Cub L-4, which patrolled the skies above the conflict zones, carrying artillery officers tasked with visually identifying active enemy cannons and relaying their exact map coordinates straight to the command hubs. Although the sluggish, low-altitude flight paths of these light planes left them exposed to ground fire, relentless patrols by American P-47 fighter-bomber squadrons effectively neutralized the German anti-aircraft threat. You will note that all of these traditional tracking methods possessed inherent flaws. Sound ranging demanded specific weather and terrain, flash spotting necessitated visual clarity, and aerial spotting required absolute control of the skies. The absolute pinnacle of counter-battery technology, albeit deployed sparingly by the middle of 1944, came in the form of the SCR-584 radar system. This cutting-edge equipment could follow the path of airborne projectiles and mathematically reverse their trajectories to expose the hidden origins of the fire, completely immune to both the darkness of night and the deceptions of enemy camouflage. Once this radar picked up a hostile shell, it beamed the exact coordinates back to the fire direction centers within a mere 90 seconds, providing a flawless technological workaround for the environmental and tactical limitations that plagued acoustic, visual, and aerial reconnaissance. Although radar systems of the era possessed a restricted operational reach, you can see how linking these diverse detection methods together created an overlapping, foolproof net of surveillance. Whenever one tracking technique faltered, another seamlessly compensated, funneling critical targeting coordinates directly into shared fire direction centers that transformed raw intelligence into devastating barrages within moments. Naturally, the German forces utilized comparable acquisition technology, boasting highly capable sound-ranging crews and skilled aerial spotters whenever they managed to launch planes. However, as you dive deeper into their tactics, you realize they completely lacked the cohesive networking required to link target discovery with instantaneous, overwhelming artillery strikes. For instance, a proficient German sound-ranging team might pinpoint an American artillery placement in 15 minutes. Yet organizing a retaliatory barrage across multiple battalions demanded an additional 30 to 40 minutes of preparation. By the time their shells finally fell, you would find that the intended target had long since relocated. Conversely, the American military achieved total integration across its tactical spectrum. Their reconnaissance elements maintained an unbroken line of communication with corps and division fire direction centers, ensuring that the moment an enemy was spotted, the coordinates were instantly fed into the broader network. These hubs immediately delegated the mission to open batteries, quickly calculated the ballistic mathematics, and rained explosives onto the newly acquired target in a matter of minutes. To grasp the sheer speed of this network, you need only look at an American aviator soaring above the Italian theater in 1944, who successfully orchestrated 5 distinct corps-level bombardments within a single hour. He spotted 5 independent targets, and through the rapid processing of the fire direction centers, each was swiftly obliterated by guns drawn from several different divisions. A staggering level of operational agility that no opposing military could replicate. When the conflict shifted to Normandy, the Americans capitalized on yet another tactical edge. The battlefield there was remarkably compressed, featuring densely packed front lines, paired with a tremendous overabundance of field guns. A standard American corps deployed in that theater possessed 8 to 12 independent artillery battalions directly under corps command, completely separate from those already attached to divisions. This vast arsenal could strike virtually any coordinate along the entire corps frontage, allowing commanders to concentrate overwhelming firepower on any objective almost instantly. German defenders fundamentally misunderstood this dynamic until they faced its full wrath firsthand on D-Day. Guarding the Con sector, which encompassed Sword, Juno, Gold, and specific stretches of Omaha Beach, was the 716th Static Infantry Division. Continuous troop reassignments to the Eastern Front had severely eroded this formation's strength, leaving them with roughly 7,000 men, many of whom were Olegian, alongside various Eastern volunteers and draftees pulled from Soviet lands. When June 6th dawned, and the unit's artillery desperately tried to lay down defensive barrages against the incoming landing craft, you would have witnessed American and British naval guns instantly answering with catastrophic, disproportionate retaliation. Whenever the German gunners attempted to fire from deeper, concealed locations, American aerial observers, flying in Piper Cubs, swiftly pinpointed their hideouts, calling down accurate counter-battery fire almost immediately. A prime example occurred at Resistance Point 62, a stronghold defended by a mixture of troops from both the 716th Static Infantry Division and the 352nd Infantry Division. Allied forces orchestrated a brutal bombardment against howitzers situated 5 kilometers inland at Hoodville, utilizing a relentless combination of American naval destroyer salvos and dedicated counter-battery strikes to completely crush these emplacements as the day wore on. Stationed defensively near St. Lo and Carentan, the 352nd Infantry Division originally entered the theater under the orders of Rommel in March 1944, boasting a full complement of around 12,000 soldiers. From the very inception of the invasion, their artillery regiments were mercilessly pulverized by the full, terrifying scope of the American counter-battery apparatus. Even before the amphibious landings commenced, Field Marshal Erwin Ronald, who commanded Army Group B, clearly recognized that the overwhelming industrial output of the Allies would ultimately dictate the course of the war. In his strategic evaluations sent to Commander-in-Chief West during the early weeks of July 1944, Rommel unequivocally highlighted the opposition's massive deployment of hardware, drawing special attention to their tanks and field guns. As you read through his dispatches to the High Command, you see him repeatedly warn that an Allied breakthrough was an absolute certainty, pointing to their unmatched supply chains, total air supremacy, and the staggering casualty rates crippling the German lines. Rommel fully comprehended that his own gunners were practically paralyzed, unable to function efficiently while under endless scrutiny from enemy warplanes and the perpetual threat of lightning-fast retaliatory bombardments. Years later, during extensive post-war interrogations, you can hear captured German commanders unanimously single out this overwhelming artillery dominance as a decisive element in the Normandy campaign. The 3rd Parachute Division moved into the region from Brittany on June 10, 1944, arriving in peak condition with a formidable roster of approximately 15,976 personnel. Command assigned them to secure the American left flank in the vicinity of the Vire River, yet, within a few short weeks, rapid response bombardments had completely decimated the unit's artillery assets. Although precise daily casualty logs are missing from the surviving archives, their subsequent action reports openly lamented that the incoming American counter-battery fire struck with such terrifying speed that traditional relocation protocols became entirely useless. During the vicious July 1944 clashes over Hill 192, located just outside St. Lo, you can observe the American artillery machine flexing the absolute maximum potential of its fire direction center framework. The 2nd Infantry Division alone unleashed up to 20-time on-target missions every single night, ensuring the entrenched defenders remained perpetually disoriented and demoralized. Through numerous interrogations, captured German personnel continually expressed their sheer astonishment at the unrelenting, oppressive volume of munitions they endured on the front lines. The tactical situation escalated further on June 29, 1944, when British contingents initiated Operation Epsom, a major push designed to sweep around Caen from its western edge. In response, the German High Command immediately authorized a sweeping counteroffensive to blunt the advance. The 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstander Adolf Hitler, which had just recently transferred from the brutal Eastern Front, gathered its remaining armor to launch an assault toward Borgerboos Ridge. Simultaneously, British diversionary tactics actively pinned down the 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions on the western banks of the Orin River, a deliberate maneuver intended to stop these elite formations from reinforcing the primary German counterattack. Working in perfect unison through their integrated fire direction centers, the combined American and British artillery relentlessly pounded the German staging grounds without a moment's pause. Consequently, the enemy counteroffensive suffered severe delays right from the start, consistently fractured by an agonizing combination of heavy shelling and devastating aerial rocket runs by the RAF Hawker Typhoon squadrons. Unable to build any meaningful momentum under such withering bombardments, the operation managed only marginal territorial gains before leadership was forced to abandon the effort in less than 24 hours. As you study the broader history of the conflict, you realize this exact cycle of overwhelming Allied fire superiority repeatedly defined the tactical rhythm of the entire Normandy campaign. Whenever German military commanders attempted to gather their forces for retaliatory offensives, they would discover their staging grounds pulverized by catastrophic bombardments long before any assault could commence. The commander-in-chief in the West, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, desperately pleaded for substantial artillery and counter-battery support, yet those vital reserves were never delivered. As the American breakout from Normandy accelerated through late July 1944, United States after-action assessments dismissed the surviving German artillery resistance as virtually non-existent. Although the enemy still possessed operational cannons, activating them guaranteed immediate annihilation by blistering American counter-battery fire that would rain down within a matter of minutes. Evaluating the Allied maritime bombardment during the Cherbourg campaign, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt characterized it as exceptionally adaptable and meticulously coordinated to assist ground infantry. He observed that vessels ranging from massive battleships to nimble gunboats essentially served as an incredibly agile, perpetually ready artillery force. Furthermore, official German military publications acknowledged these relentless Allied naval barrages as a decisive advantage, praising their pinpoint accuracy during tactical emergencies and their unwavering persistence on target as a premier form of floating artillery. By April 1945, Imperial Japanese units stationed on Okinawa encountered this exact same formidable American counter-battery network. Having carefully analyzed Wehrmacht dispatches from the Normandy front, the Japanese implemented radical shoot-and-scoot maneuvers to avoid certain destruction. Their artillery crews would discharge a mere 2 or 3 projectiles before instantly fleeing their posts for the safety of subterranean tunnels and reinforced caves, frequently leaving their actual cannons behind as bait. Understanding that devastating retaliatory bombardments would strike within moments, the defenders made absolutely certain that their personnel were safely hidden underground before the incoming explosives detonated. United States sound-ranging units deployed across Okinawa proved incredibly efficient, pinpointing enemy firing locations a mere 5 minutes after a weapon was discharged. Within 9 minutes of that initial acoustic detection, precise American counter-battery shells were already obliterating the target coordinates. However, when advancing infantrymen stormed these bombarded sites, they routinely discovered unoccupied fortifications and abandoned ordnance. Consequently, United States commanders shifted their strategic focus, utilizing their massive firepower not merely to obliterate the hardware, but to relentlessly suppress the area. Whenever a hidden Japanese cannon revealed itself, American batteries would saturate that specific zone for a full 30 minutes, guaranteeing that enemy crews could never emerge to reload the weapon while American armor and infantry safely pushed forward. Throughout the grueling 82 days of combat on Okinawa, United States artillery units unleashed an astonishing 3 million projectiles. This staggering volume averaged 36,000 rounds every single day, eclipsing the total ammunition expenditure of several European nations throughout the entirety of the global conflict. Captured Imperial artillery officers repeatedly testified that the American counter-battery barrages were the most lethal they had ever faced, arriving with a speed and precision that defied all their expectations. Ultimately, the Japanese military never devised a solution to this overwhelming firepower. They merely altered their survival tactics, remaining utterly incapable of either suppressing the American cannons or mounting an effective retaliation.
As the Second World War drew to a close, the artillery branch had unequivocally transformed into the most lethal and effective component of the United States ground forces. General George Patton, who brilliantly led the Third Army across France and Germany, boldly declared that the conflict was predominantly won through the sheer power of heavy guns. Even as a dedicated armor officer, Patton freely offered this high praise because he fully comprehended the monumental battlefield achievements of his cannon crews. The revolutionary Fire Direction Center framework, initially conceptualized at Fort Sill during the 1930s, had permanently established the universal blueprint for modern ballistics operations.
Today, every contemporary military force on the planet relies upon some variation of the Fire Direction Center to manage its bombardments. The fundamental practice of centralizing ballistic control through pre-computed mathematical data and subsequently massing the firepower of numerous dispersed units via synchronized communications is now an absolute global standard. Furthermore, the devastating time-on-target tactic remains a cornerstone of artillery instruction worldwide, ensuring that all dispatched projectiles strike the enemy coordinates at the exact same fraction of a second. Modern counter-battery missions continue to utilize the exact same foundational theories pioneered during the Second World War. While today's armed forces employ sophisticated radar, acoustic sensors, and advanced aerial reconnaissance to pinpoint enemy guns, just as their predecessors did in 1944, the underlying philosophy of swiftly locating and obliterating hostile batteries before they can relocate remains entirely unchanged. The brilliant minds who engineered this unstoppable system rarely achieved historical fame. Major Carlos Brewer, a key architect behind the revolutionary Fort Sill Fire Direction Center concept, is hardly recognized by the general public today. Similarly, the countless commissioned officers and enlisted mathematicians who operated these stressful command posts throughout the Normandy hedgerows, desperately calculating complex firing solutions while coordinating dozens of batteries under enemy fire, were granted no prestigious accolades. The courageous aerial observers who piloted fragile Piper Cubs directly over German lines, deliberately attracting lethal anti-aircraft fire simply to spot hidden enemy artillery, are barely a footnote in most historical texts, yet their contributions were absolutely vital to the Allied victory. Those German artillery officers who managed to survive the conflict universally pointed to the American heavy guns as the most devastating threat they encountered on the battlefield. General Hans Eberbach, who commanded the 5th Panzer Army during the Normandy campaign, openly admitted to his interrogators that the United States artillery dominance was thoroughly insurmountable. German after-action reports continually lamented that American forces possessed the terrifying ability to summon catastrophic barrages upon any Wehrmacht position in a matter of minutes, rendering all German counterattacks futile against an adversary whose guns repositioned too rapidly and were far too numerous to silence. To illustrate this immense scale, the 28th Field Artillery Battalion of the 8th Infantry Division alone unleashed over 40,000 shells during the Normandy offensive, while their dedicated Fire Direction Center seamlessly managed hundreds of distinct tactical missions. The identities of the dedicated mathematical specialists who meticulously crunched the firing data for those critical bombardments remain largely absent from historical archives. As you explore the annals of military history, you will quickly realize that this is exactly how the narrative unfolds. The most pivotal innovations that fundamentally alter the nature of warfare frequently remain invisible to the very soldiers fighting on the front lines. The vaunted German artillery apparatus, which had been a terrifyingly effective instrument of war for decades, ultimately found itself completely outclassed by a technologically superior adversary capable of tracking, targeting, and annihilating its cannons far faster than traditional military doctrine deemed possible. Ultimately, the United States military marched to victory, backed by an artillery network that was exceptionally responsive, flawlessly accurate, and completely overwhelming.
As July of 1944 drew to a close, military leaders commanding the German forces throughout Normandy repeatedly noted that the overwhelming firepower of American artillery stood as a primary obstacle, completely thwarting their ability to mount effective defenses or launch counteroffensives. These groundbreaking tactics had initially been conceived by military officers stationed in Oklahoma back in 1931. Following years of meticulous refinement through rigorous training and the evolution of military doctrine, these strategies were ultimately executed by countless troops and centralized fire direction centers within every United States artillery division. This comprehensive approach played a monumental role in the most expansive military operation the nation had ever undertaken. The profound success of this framework did not stem from isolated moments of brilliance, but rather from the seamless unification of advanced technology, established doctrine, intense preparation, and robust communication, forging a highly synchronized entity that completely outclassed any opposing military force. We frequently explore these overlooked narratives of the Second World War, focusing on the profound ingenuity and immense sacrifices that continue to influence our modern era. If exploring these historical milestones brings you value, stay connected with us so you can continue uncovering the remarkable technological advancements that ultimately determined the course of the conflict. Your continued dedication helps ensure these crucial chapters of our shared past are never forgotten.